So this creepy noise voice now comes on for recording of the Zoom. So please consent to that so you can stay on. Guys, welcome to the Leopard Solutions webinar on how law firms, legal recruiters, and candidates can navigate opportunities and challenges in today's booming job market. I'm Stephanie Marone. I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I am so excited for the discussion today. We have 7 really awesome people to have a discussion about what's going on in this unprecedented market today. So we've got great topics to discuss with you. And if you have any specific questions that you would like us to answer, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will hopefully get to them at the end. And whatever we don't get to, we will do a follow-up piece. We are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to view it afterward. And we are also working on a white paper as well to go along with some of the information that Laura is going to provide to us. Okay, so I am just, someone just make sure, give me a thumbs up, Laura, if you can see my next slide. Yes. Okay. Yep. All right, so we are here because law firms are hiring in droves. This is the, I think they said in general, the market is the hottest that it's been, the hiring market in many years. The Wall Street Journal reported that the hiring market is the hottest in I don't know, 10 years or so, which is great because we were in the doldrums about a year ago and people weren't sure what was going to happen. So I just pulled some of the headlines of recent days, actually over the last week. So look at what I pulled here. Big law associate appetite means new perils for regional firms. Don't forget due diligence in the race for lateral associate hires. Apparently folks are getting hired same day. It's unsustainable. Unprecedented workloads are taking a toll on corporate teams. Big law firms better match the new salary scale. We're going to talk about that new salary scale soon. Same day hiring and signing bonuses. The corporate associate market is on fire, right? So, and law firms are pulling out all the stops in the hot hiring market. Okay, nothing you haven't seen before. The recovery came a lot quicker than I think a lot of people thought, or actually a lot of firms were doing just fine during the pandemic, which if you attended the last webinar we did about the state of the legal market, you will have noticed and seen that a lot of firms were doing okay. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably have heard that many firms have raised their associate compensation. And this is the first time it's been done in about 3 years or so. So it went from 180,000 to 200,000, and it actually went up. I think it was the other day, Davis Polk went up to 205, right? So we're above the law is tracking. So now 205 seems to be the number. Milbank was one of the first firms to come out with the new number. And this is from first year associates all the way up to 8th year associates. Plus there are signing bonuses. So I would want to talk to Nicole about some of these signing bonuses and these other perks. Clients aren't necessarily so happy with this because it does filter down to them. So we will be doing another webinar on the client reaction to this. We're getting a lot of questions about that. The pay bump impacts everybody, but what we're hearing is that law firms are doing so well, so they have money to spend, and they've been saving money on unnecessary travel, overhead, and other expenses. Plus, the corporate work is paying for a lot of these other expenses. They want to put their money back into their people, and they want to make sure they retain their people. Okay. The Wall Street Journal reported that the Great Resignation is coming. This is not just in the law firm world, but in general, that employees are going to be looking for new jobs. So retention of employees is so important. We are going to spend a good amount of today talking about how law firms can make sure they retain their talent. 2 of my clients, I was saying before everyone joined, recently lost their diverse lawyers, 2 associates and 2 women lawyers. Your women and your diverse lawyers are at extreme risk of being poached. So they need special attention and care right now because it is a very hot market for those candidates. And then just know that as the pandemic clouds lift, a lot of people are deciding not to go back to the office. So if your firm has these, come back to the office full time kind of, policies in place, you may be behind the times and people are quitting and going to do other things or going to firms that offer much more flexible kinds of work environments. So that's another thing to think about. I keep hearing about firms wanting to go back to normal, and I'm surprised. And I want to talk to this group about that, because I think that those firms, if you were on our webinar about women in who are not making partner and what's going on there, a lot of that has to do with firms that are rigid and not flexible. And one of the things I'm finding is that a lot of firms don't have a recruiting marketing strategy, which is a huge mistake. So I'm working with a top 10 firm right now on this alone, because it's not enough to have a great name on the door and do great work. You have to market yourselves publicly, and you have to talk about what you do in comparison to your competitors. And marketing is just as important as you market to your clients as you market to recruits. So make sure you have that. I have an article on my blog that I'm happy to send as a follow-up on this. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, we're gonna try and make some sense of this today, and we've assembled an amazing panel today. So I'd like each of our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, tell us what you do and where you do it, and then we're going to do a deep dive into the questions. So Diana, I think I did this alphabetically. It was early this morning, but hopefully I did it okay. So Diana, can we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Diana Barninger. I am currently the Senior Director of Lawyer and Consultant Recruiting at Faegre Drinker. I have nationwide responsibilities for all levels of lawyer and consultant hiring, from law students to lateral partners. I've been doing recruiting and talent management in law firms for over 20 years, and I've at several other AmLaw 100 firms.
Awesome.
Pass it on to the next person. Thanks.
We can't wait to hear from you on your insights. All right, Dan, you're up next.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Dan DiResta. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Williams Kastner, which is a regional firm in the Northwest. Previously, for about a decade, I was at AmLaw 100, heading up attorney recruiting. And just after that, I was Chief Operating Officer at a boutique that specialized in environmental law.
Awesome. Dan, how many lawyers does your firm currently have?
Just under 70.
Okay, awesome. Nicole?
Thank you. I'm Nicole Kennedy, and I am the National Associate Practice Group Leader with Lucas Group. I primarily work with the AmLaw 50, and prior to being a recruiter, I practiced law for about 15 years.
Awesome. Okay, so you've got a lot of different perspectives to share with us, and you're our lone recruiter on this panel, so we've got a lot of questions directed at you, Nicole.
Okay.
Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Leopard, coming to you today from Nashville, Tennessee, and we're going to be sharing some great data with you about laterals that have been hired, job openings, job closings, and trend lines to watch for. So I'm the CEO of Leopard Solutions, and I thank everyone on the panel for coming and helping us with this today.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Oh, okay, this is me. Okay, so I'm Stephanie Marone. I have been working in law firm marketing for 20 years. I was at a lot of big law firms, and then I was the CMO of a mid-sized firm. And then I started my own business about 1.5 years ago. And if you hear barking in the background, those are my 2 misbehaved puppies, French Bulldog puppies. Okay, David.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, I'm David Rose. I'm a litigation partner and executive committee member at Pryor Cashman, New York-based firm with offices in Los Angeles and Miami as well.
Awesome. David, how many lawyers do you guys have? About 300 or so?
No, we actually have 180 lawyers.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay. I am very interested in hearing your perspective about hiring at the firm over the last, 16 months or so. So I'm really excited that you're here.
Glad to be here and looking forward to imparting that.
Thank you. All right, Danny, you're one of our veterans on our panels.
Hi, yes, thank you for having me back. These are always fun discussions. I am the Chief Talent Officer at Buchanan, Ingersoll & Rooney. Buchanan has about 450 attorneys and government relations professionals firm-wide. I lead the talent management department, which is inclusive of recruiting, professional development, and human resources.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Danny. Danny was on a panel we did about a month ago or so on why women aren't making partner and what law firms can do to retain and support women. And we had such a great reaction to that webinar. So if you would like to see it, we have it's on the Leopard website, etc., and on our social channels. Let us know, and we're happy to send you a copy of it. But we really had a great time. Thank you for your insights on that, Danny. And then last but not least, Mary Kay Young.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Kay, and I'm really glad to be here. I come to the legal world from after 13 years in corporate experience. I was 10 years at Kraft Foods and very heavily involved in recruiting while I was there, moving in business leadership roles. We were also in charge of marketing recruiting on campus at the business schools we worked with. And for 15 years, I've been with Zeughauser Group. After having been a CMO at a law firm, I joined Zeughauser Group. We are a management consulting firm that works very closely, almost exclusively with law firms. And we, and including me, would get involved in this area because we are leaders in working with firms on strategic growth plans, which often involve recruiting, right? So a big part of it, and recruiting at all levels. And so we touch it in that way. We also kind of have our ear to the ground on what's going on with firms. And the other thing is I work on branding and marketing planning, and that to Stephanie's earlier point, we always keep in mind, and oftentimes it is even more important, the effect of the brand on recruiting. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I mean the data that you guys information you guys put out on like law firm mergers, which I know Zeughauser Group has quite a bit of information. I mean, there's a lot going on, like little groups being consumed, et cetera, in this market. So I'm excited to talk to you, Mary Kay.
Yeah, that M&A work is a huge part of our practice too, and it's red hot all the time. You just don't always hear about it because it doesn't always work.
Right. If done right, probably we don't hear about it at all. So now I'm going to turn this over to Laura to talk about the data. What are we showing? Leopard Solutions tracks over 4,000 law firms and has a robust amount of data. And then Laura will present, which I think is some terrific information. And then we're going to dive into these findings. So Laura, I'm going to stop sharing and
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Here we go. All right. So we're so happy to be here today and to share not only the data with you, but some great insights from our panel about what's going on in the legal market. Whoops, I hit that a little too fast. This to us at Leopard is astounding. So last June, our job program had about 3,000 job openings. Normally there's between 5,000, 6,000 jobs, sometimes 6,200. So basically that job program was cut in half. Last June it was cut in half, if not lower. Now we have over 9,000 openings in that job program. It has never ever been this high. So we have a team that's working their fingers to the bone right now to keep on top of all of these job openings. And we're going to dig down and see what's behind that big number. So for these charts, for these lateral charts, I ran a lot of reports just on the top 200 because that's very consistent data. We didn't add firms to the top 200, so it wouldn't be influenced by new additions to the database. So this, we think, will give us a good pattern of what's happening at the law firms with the historical perspective. So this is sort of trained on the top 200. If we look in 2020, lateral hiring in January was very good. Lateral hiring in February was very good. We were on track to have yet another banner year. Almost every year, lateral recruiting goes up. You see more numbers every year. in March, right when COVID was hitting, very high lateral numbers, but this was because there were already a lot of deals in the works. They weren't putting on the brakes yet. All of these were deals that were already in motion. So high numbers in March. And then of course we had a big step down in April. We had another step down in May. So I wanted to look at the same time period. So for the 2021 in January, we had pretty good lateral hire numbers. It really went up in February, went up again in March, kind of flatlined in April, but look at May. So these numbers are from May to June 9th was when I pulled the numbers for this report. So we really see the foot on the accelerator as lateral hires are coming in. And I think it's also important to note that lateral hires, these numbers lag somewhat behind job openings, right? So when we look at job data, you'll see something that's just a little bit different. But we see strong showings for lateral hires in 2021, which is wonderful. So we also wanted to look at diversity and compare the same periods of both years. And the real story is diversity hiring is doing better. So those numbers are getting better. But conversely, what does that mean for law firms? It puts all of their diverse attorneys at risk of being poached. You know, there's not that many diverse attorneys working at the top firms across the country. So if everyone just stops swapping out those same attorneys, it's going to be really hard to hang on to those diversity attorneys in your law firm. The good news is that in the same period last year, only 904 attorneys who had a high probability of being ethnically diverse were recruited. This year, that number's up to 1,297. We also saw a really good showing for attorneys who had a high probability of being gender diverse in 2021. It was up a couple of hundred from this same period last year. So all of that is really good news. Also, the fact this year it's up 2% for attorneys that are both gender and ethnically diverse. So we're seeing some positive signs, but this also can mean firms may have a harder time holding on to those diverse attorneys, as Stephanie mentioned earlier. The numbers back you up on that. Then we thought we would just look at partner hires for just a moment. Partner hires, we were able to track with lateral moves. We really don't have a lot to say about partner hires looking at job data because the predominance of job availability in our job program are for associates, right? So here's where we can really see numbers about partner hires. So we can see that 2021 is still a little depressed for this same period from 2020. But as we looked at that lateral data a moment ago, please remember it was a really fast start in the first 3 months of 2020, and then it dropped off the cliff. For 2021, it was the inverse. We had a bit of a slower start, and now we're starting to pick up steam. So we are confident that these numbers are going to change very quickly. But let's look at the numbers of diverse hires very quickly. So in 2020, only 158 partner laterals within that top 200, that's what we're looking at here, had a high probability of being ethnically diverse. So right now it's 165. So it's very similar at this moment. But there were also more hires that we cataloged during this period. 317 were gender diverse, 264 in 2021. But because it's really not, because the sort of the inverse hiring is true, we expect those numbers to go up from what we saw just a moment ago. And I also just wanted to look year on year because everyone sees 2020 and those numbers are very depressed. What was it like the year before that? Well, lateral hiring was very high. So we did drop a lot in lateral hiring in 2020. We also saw better hiring of gender diverse and ethnically diverse attorneys during that same period. So we expect the diversity hiring to go up. We hope it happens on the partner level. A lot of it does happen on the associate level, and that partner level diverse hiring is a little lower. We're hoping that might change this year. Then we thought we would look at lateral hires by location for 2021. There's really not a lot of surprises here. New York, center of the universe, 24% of that lateral hiring was in New York City, 12% in DC. And the rest are in sort of single digits. The only thing that really sort of surprised me was Boston here at 3%, you know, Boston, Atlanta, 3%, San Francisco at 4%, but the New York number, not a big surprise. That's still, you know, very much the same. Then we thought we would look at lateral hires by practice area. So just as we talked about a moment ago, corporate is the big story here. In 2020, 17% of those lateral hires were in the corporate practice area. So far this year, 27%. That's a 10% increase. So it's corporate, corporate, corporate. We had 34% of those lateral hires in this period, 34% were litigation, cooled slightly to just 29%. So that's the story there. Really, the big headline is corporate, 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 big rise in lateral hiring for those corporate associates, counsels, and partners. Then we just thought we would look at the major practices, you know, by year by comparison. So look at those corporate numbers. In 2020, 733 hires. So far in 2021, 1,278. So huge jump in corporate hiring. Litigation, it's pretty flat. It's a little depressed, but not by too much. But what might be surprising are the numbers for IP and labor and employment. So labor and employment is still high, still very popular at this particular point in time, and so is IP. So a lot of IP hires are going on right now. The one item that depressed a little bit, banking. Banking rose. So banking 242 was at 196. What really dropped was bankruptcy, surprisingly. So in 2020, 137 during this period, and in 2021, just 78. So again, corporate, 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 and then IP is something to also watch. So yesterday at about 4:20, I went into our job program and I just put in all the open statuses, which is NC for no change, new, and record change. And there were 9,136. We update this program Monday through Friday, all day long. It's real time. So these numbers change all the time, which is why I keep sort of stressing the time and date that I'm pulling this data, because it changes all the time. This is an incredible rise. Of course, it's not just all attorney jobs and it's not just all USA jobs. So we're going to break that down for you, but we have never cracked 9,000 in our history. So this is really, really remarkable. And those are individual openings. So there's over 9,000 job records in there. So when you break down those current opportunities, you can see for attorneys in the US, yesterday there were 5,562 openings for attorneys. In the international market, there were 1,486, and then there were over 2,000 support jobs available. So I wanted to break it all down by practice area as well as category. So corporate, far and above, you know, the biggest thing we're looking at, 1,687. Now, we have fewer attorneys in our international program. So of course, those numbers are less, but they follow the same pattern. So corporate is still the leading practice area in that international market, followed by litigation, which is the same in the US. But what might surprise everyone is this. IP openings. Right now, we have 661 IP attorney openings in the database, followed by 449 support IP positions, and that's patent agents and technical specialists. So IP might be sort of the sleeping practice area that seems to be gaining speed. I know when I shared this, there were people that expressed surprise about that, but that is what our data shows. So corporate through the roof, litigation kind of flat, IP rising from almost nowhere for both support staff and attorney positions. So now we thought we would look at job openings. So these are how many jobs opened during a particular period. So we have 2020 on this side in this chart, starting with January, February. High numbers, lots of jobs were opening. March, middle of the pandemic, jobs dropped a good bit, not a surprise. And then April, jobs dropped again. And it started a slow climb. Then in August, September, we saw some gains, leveled back off, for that holiday period. Then we get to 2021, where we're seeing this extraordinary growth, and we have January, February, March, April, May, and of course, June is still going on. We expect June to be, at the top of the chart for job openings again. So you can really see what happened throughout the pandemic by looking at these job openings. I think that's pretty clear. So now, and this is not support, this is associate partner council openings is what we're looking at. And now we are looking at associate partner council job closing. So these are how many jobs were closed during a specific period. So not that many closed in January, a few more closed in February. Now the pandemic starts, right? And you get a huge rise in job openings. So if you remember in the lateral chart, there were a lot of laterals that were brought on board in March, but this is not reflective of that. This is going to show us there were jobs that were closed because they weren't filled. They were just closed because they weren't going to be filled. And that's why we had both of these months with such huge job closings, because that did not reflect in the data for lateral hires. So this was everybody going, whoa, let's put the brakes on and let's pull that job and then repost it when we're ready. So we saw a huge drop, right? Everything was just sort of static for a while. Then we began to see a few more jobs close, a few more jobs close. And then of course, in 2021, we're seeing, jobs are closing, and they're closing at a little bit of a faster pace. So this totally backs up, all the other data and what we thought. The only anomaly in this chart are these, because these jobs weren't really filled. Those jobs were closed because they were not ready to fill them at that particular time. So now we're going to look at something a little different. We are preparing a special product with some insider information. As we look at this is sort of what people are searching for in our database. I want everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. This is all anonymized data, but we do have it by particular types that are grouped. So we can tell what each group of customer is searching for in our database. We are always looking for some sort of predictive measurement to help us show what's coming. So we have job openings. We can see what everybody's looking for with a job opening, but what are they really searching for? What are they looking for? That's what this information is going to tell us. So the top chart is what law firms are looking for. We have a lot of law firm clients, and what they are searching for is in all of these graphs. So in January, they were searching for doing a lot more corporate searches. These were rather grouped. So that's IP, L&E, and litigation in a tight little clump there. Corporate searches went up in February. Corporate searches went through the roof in March. And also looked what happened here. Look at IP. IP is at a very high level. So it was here, and now it's here. Remember that job data we saw where there's more IP openings? Well, this is also reflected in law firms searching for IP professionals. In April, it sort of dipped for corporate searches. They went slightly back up in May, but IP was still really high in April. So that's something I think we should watch for. At the bottom, we see what legal search firms were searching for during this same period. So you're seeing corporate, lit, not quite as many IP searches. So I just wanted to get an easy comparison. So I overlaid the two charts just to see any differences. And you can see recruiters were searching for corporate people at a much higher clip than law firms in January. True is for February. In March, they were both searching with equal speed. This really, I think, says that high demand for those corporate people. They really can't wait. They want to get in there and find those people as quickly as they can, using recruiters and doing their own searches. In April, recruiters are still searching for corporate at a much higher clip. And look here, look at IP in both periods. We have law firms searching for IP almost twice as more as the legal search firms are searching. I find that really interesting. And then we also have litigation. Recruiters were searching for a few more litigators there. So I think IP is an area recruiters might want to pay a little more attention to, because it's really picking up some steam in interest and in job openings. So I think that's something to remember. Now, we also have another group of clients, because we have a lot of corporations that buy our data, big corporations that are doing searches for attorneys, either to hire or to hire for outside counsel. And their search pattern looks completely different, doesn't it? So their needs are very different from what law firms are looking for. It's a little more tightly packed. And while you see a high need for corporate in February, it starts to level off, and then the corporate needs really drop off. We are seeing IP at a high level too in March, which does mirror somewhat a firm interest. It's still relatively high in April. It has dropped off a little bit since then in May, but what they're searching for is slightly different than what those law firms are searching for. And I think this could be really interesting data for firms to know what kind of talent those in-house companies are looking for and how they might provide it. So our data tells a very compelling story. It gives a few sides of the picture, from job openings, lateral hires, and from what might be coming. And we'll make these slides available to you, as well as the video today. Thank you.
Okay, so that's some really robust information. So I'd like to just ask everybody, what are your initial thoughts on the data? Does it back up what you're seeing in your own business and your own firms? Nicole, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure, 100%. We lived this data that you just shared. So it was really interesting to see everything that I was experiencing laid out in your graphs. So it very much was in line with what I was seeing.
What do you guys think about this uptick in intellectual property that seemed to be the sleeper? So I was one of the people who was surprised when Laura presented that information. And so she went back and looked at the data again. I was a little surprised by it. Any thoughts from the panel on IP as a sort of up and coming sleeper area? Did we stump?
Well, for me, it didn't surprise me, just because that does track with what I'm experiencing internally. So I would be curious if it did stump anyone else, but that's what I'm seeing.
So Diana, in terms of you're seeing an increase of work in IP. Are you seeing it on IP transactional? Are you seeing it on IP litigation? What are you guys seeing?
We're seeing needs in both areas. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's on the associate side. And I would say it has tracked, I mean, not to the levels of our corporate needs, but it has tracked with the general trend lines.
Okay.
This past spring.
This data also, there's lots of partner searches that, this for the most part is a lot of associate data, right? Like we can track here where partners go, but a lot of the searches for partners are obviously not posted on law firm websites, right? So those are private searches, but this is interesting to see what's being searched. David, what are your thoughts of the data presented today?
So what resonated most with me was the corporate search slide, because that I found to be most reflective of the type of workflow we're seeing and the tighter grouping in terms of corporate with IP and litigation. We've certainly seen demand on the corporate side and have hired pretty aggressively there, but it trails behind the extent to which we've needed to bring on people on the litigation side in particular, which is just really starting just before the fourth quarter last year and continuing through, and we see it continuing for another year at least. A lot of litigation activity, and again, that corporate search slide seems to bear out where our clients are looking for assistance.
Okay. Mary Kay, any thoughts on this? Insights? What do you think about the data presented?
Sure. I mean, I think David pointed out that there is demand. And so what we're seeing from our clients is that, so as I think someone touched on early on, demand picked up, was much stronger last year than anybody expected it would be. I mean, and if you remember March and April, people were just hanging on to cash, which is, why they've had hiring freezes and so on. Everybody was very worried about that. As we got into June and July, business actually was not falling off a cliff after all. And the demand for many firms and very successful firms was quite high versus prior years. So now we're coming into 2021, we're seeing deal flow and litigation picking up. And my guess is if you looked at the IP litigation stats, you'd see those where they've been flat for years, probably coming up, and maybe there's some pent up demand because litigation kind of was pushed back in 2020 because of COVID.
As a chief talent officer, Danny, what do you think about this? Does it align with what you're doing? And from a retention standpoint, there's a lot of talk about hiring, but what about keeping the folks that you do have?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. Something that struck me at the data was consistent with ours was just the numbers, because I went back and looked at, because it feels crazy to me. It feels like we're hiring all the time. Our staff can barely pick up. We have so many openings. And so I went back and looked at the numbers, and not just in comparison to 2020, but even looking beyond that, our own numbers at Buchanan have tripled. Our pace of hiring has tripled. And I noticed, that 3,000 to 9,000 number there was very consistent with that. We weren't completely consistent with the practice areas. Like David had said, litigation has been our strongest, but also labor and employment. And I thought labor and employment was going to have a peak because there were so many COVID-related issues. And maybe we're still riding that, but we continue to see a huge boom in labor and employment, which might not have been necessarily reflected on that chart.
Okay. Dan, from your perspective, does this mirror the things that you're seeing with respect to your firm?
Definitely similar to David in that we're heavily litigation. So we've seen that growth throughout the pandemic, and definitely in the last, the fourth quarter last year and into current times. The IP doesn't surprise me as much though, because from my network within the AmLaw 200, that's been going on for a few years. And I think the delay in hiring in 2020 has kind of exasperated all the talent within those firms to a point where they've reached, a threshold where I don't know if they can keep working at that level without burnout. And so there is a strong need to kind of balance those groups out. I think IP is one in particular. Outside of litigation. But for the most part, we've seen just increases in litigation, even with the courts not really returning. But again, the Pacific Northwest is typically a little bit behind in trending in nationally usually. So we usually get like, in a month from now, we'll have similar kind of urgency. So I don't know why that's the case, but the Pacific Northwest has always been a little bit behind. So that's what I'm seeing.
And so for my law firm in-house professionals, Danny, Diana, David, and Dan, question for you guys. With so much competition, are you seeing your folks be poached? And what are you doing to retain your people, your associates?
I'm happy to take that one first.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think succession planning is really key right now. Remotely, going to the remote status was pretty easy for us. We have about 70 attorneys, and we were built really well with our technology to go remote. We found that, more than half of the attorneys were more productive. And so what we care about right now is making sure that flexibility stays to help retain people. So their happiness factor stays high, especially with the fear of a number of these reports that major law firms are full return in July or full return in September. That scares a lot of attorneys. And so they hope that we're not a lemming or have that lemming mentality that doesn't take into account the mental health benefits for those that enjoyed it from working from home. I think there's a lot of factors that go into, trying to retain people. I think we are kind of honing in on succession planning to create blueprints for people to help retain them and show them kind of like their progression in career. And that's been going on for like the last 2 decades, the concern around the boomer generation retiring. Some of that group has extended their time within firms due to the pandemic, whereas others have kind of definitively said, I'm retiring. And so that's created some disruption of its own, regardless of hiring. And the hope is that internally you have the people that are set up for the succession, but where there are gaps, you need to hire. And, I think the challenge here is if the areas where you have to hire are where the feeding frenzy is now in corporate or these other areas, it's extremely challenging because that's a typical hire that is so critical that can't be screwed up. And, lateral hiring, there's a high risk of error there. In the last 20 years, there's been, it's almost like a coin toss up. So I think there has to be a lot more due diligence in reviewing the lateral hiring right now. If you are in a position like a mid-sized firm that is aligning these succession plans and trying to create growth in a way that's more strategic rather than just the need of the client, but like 10 years out, that's a challenge for a firm our size because of like what you're talking about, ridiculous salaries and compensation to attract people away.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'd like to add to that if I can on retention. So when we would have panels like this at the beginning of the pandemic and discussion with colleagues, everybody said how you treat your associates now, even if they're not going to be leaving, is going to impact the retention, once we kind of quote unquote went back to normal. And I think we have seen that, and we made a dedicated effort to really communicate. And so I think the same is going to be true of how we return people to the office. And I would say the key to retention is communication. We have bumped it up in really every way possible. We're doing large scale surveys to seek feedback from our attorneys and staff. We're doing individual stay interviews instead of waiting to find out why somebody is unhappy in an exit interview. Why not find out now? And our CEO is holding monthly meetings with the entire firm. We're being incredibly transparent, talking about firm finances, information in the past that was just limited to voting, our top level of shareholders is being shared more broadly. And we are walking everybody through what the return to office is going to look like with, constant communication. So I do think that's the key to retention.
Yeah, if I could just add to what Danielle said, I think it's intentionality as it relates to retention and in terms of making sure people remain connected to the firm culture. And in the mid-size environment, we're very fortunate to be able to develop a culture that people do feel connected to as individuals. And to the point about, interviews and surveys, asking those questions, finding out what's on people's minds has been incredibly helpful for us, not just to retain people, but to maintain that culture. And the last thing I'll say is, we're actually a huge beneficiary of the flight from big law. And while we certainly focus on retention, we're also very much focused on how do we make this place welcoming to people who are coming from an environment they didn't really find so, let's say, optimal for them. And so it's both sides. It's both retention, but also thinking about why are people going to come here and what should we be doing to make sure that they want to stay here?
Yeah, and with the $205,000, entry level salary, I think that is appealing to some, but that is not appealing to everyone. So I was talking to a group the other day, and having worked at a mid-sized firm myself, I know that that's not why a lot of lawyers go to certain firms. So there's an appeal to go to a mid-sized firm or a small boutique. It's not about salary. So Nicole, this brings me to you. When you're hearing, you work with the top 50, so I'm sure salary is among the top reasons, but from a perspective in terms of, other candidates whereby, salary isn't the only or the top reason why they may leave a firm, don't you think there's a lot of opportunity for mid-sized and small boutique firms here in the market, or what are you seeing your candidates? What are they looking for when it comes to a new firm? Is the salary now the biggest attractor?
No, I have, and really, I'm generally moving somebody from one AmLaw 50 firm to another. So most of my people, they're not moving more to the regional firms on average. But I will say that in this intense market, it isn't just about the money. Like we are seeing, especially in this hot corporate space, like you'll have a candidate that's getting 3 and 4 offers, and they all have sign-ons attached to them. And many of them are not picking the firm that has the largest sign-on. So that tells us it's more about other factors. Like maybe they want to move to a firm that's going to allow them to do more of the type of work that they're interested in doing. That seems to be a big one. Like if they're at a firm now and they're just in corporate, and their corporate group does cap market and M&A, but there's an opportunity over here that's going to allow them to specialize in private equity M&A. Those people are getting the opportunities. I also think, like some of you have said, even with the big firms, they each do have their own culture, and helping build the relationship is key to retaining people at a current firm or wooing to a new firm. That relationship means a lot to these candidates out there in the marketplace, and especially when you're dealing with a lockstep firm situation where the salary is the same. There are these other things that firms can do to distinguish themselves outside just the sign-on.
Okay. And are you, to my law firm folks, are you guys actively discussing this building recruiting strategy for right now on recruiting and retention and these things and marketing yourselves? Like what have you found to be the most surprising thing about the current market? Or have there been surprising things about the market for you? Diana, any thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure I can say surprising. I mean, I think the corporate thing, if you were watching it, we saw it coming. I think the pace and the volume certainly surprised us. I mean, we just couldn't keep up for a number of reasons. And I think Danny kind of expressed the same. But so no, I mean, nothing there. I think the other piece though too is just wanted to build off something that Nicole just said about retention and just I know we talked about intentionality, but also like attentiveness and flexibility. I completely agree with Danny that the name of the game is communication, as we are all in this, sort of retention mode, and always should be, frankly. But we need to remind ourselves to be flexible internally as well. And that's not just in this, transition from work from home and back to the office, which certainly does demand flexibility, but also with internal approaches to training or retraining, repurposing, allowing folks to communicate those desires that Nicole was just talking about. Like I would like to focus more on private equity. And it's asking those questions and listening to your people, and really building on those relationships that you have internally too.
Mm-hmm. And are you folks seeing? So what are you guys seeing in terms of millennials and Generation Z? That is something that comes up quite a bit. Are you seeing that there are different drivers for more junior lawyers than there are for sort of the Xers and the older lawyers? Are you seeing that, it's a different strategy in terms of recruiting and retention for those folks?
It is. I think so. I don't see millennials and Gen Z being as driven by money. And so we're watching these salary wars, and Above Law is calling them the salary games that the firms are playing. And some of those salaries, I mean, they're jaw dropping, right? That's a lot of money, and people want to feel valued and they want to feel like they're fairly compensated. But it's been my experience that that's not what is, the primary, thing that people want to get out of their jobs who are millennial. There's flexibility, and we talked about that, but we need to be careful when we talk about flexibility, because we need to tell the more senior attorneys that doesn't mean that they want to work less. They want to work differently. They want certain resources. They want to know that the firm has, a commitment to diversity. They want to be able to work, different times. They want to know that people care about their wellness. So I think those are the things that are driving some of these younger generations more than money. But I mean, everybody loves money, and those firms are going to have some immediate, gains. They've got a ton of visibility now. They're going to have, retention for at least the short term, but we're playing the long game here.
Okay.
Yeah. What Danny says is 100% our experience in terms of certain of the things that millennials and Gen Z lawyers are interested in, but also they're interested in the institution more than people think. I think it's a myth that Gen Z and millennial lawyers have no loyalty to an institution. Well, it's a two-way street, and they'll be as loyal to you as you are to them. And so one of the things that we do is try to provide, transparency is an overused word. What does that really mean? But what we really do is let people understand the institution. How do we operate? How do we budget? How are we planning to be around in 5, 10, 20, 60 years so that they can feel that they're part of an enterprise? And that's been very important to us. I think we've done a good job of that. I hope, I don't think we've perfected it necessarily, but that's something we're going to continue to focus on as well, so that people feel connected to the institution.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add on to that, I feel like the pandemic for us, granted we're smaller, and so there's a lot more interpersonal discussion. And so it was kind of an act of re-engagement for the firm to know what each, level of person wanted within the firm. So we did a lot of surveys, we did a lot of small group discussion. We created new groups, and we expanded other committees to involve people to get their feedback. And it was interesting. I think the remote question keeps coming up, like, oh, is it for millennials or Gen Z? I mean, we found that Gen X, for example, are extremely wanting the ability to be from home a few days a week. So I'm not sure if that's exactly honed in on the younger group. However, though, I agree with the previous statements about how involved the millennials and Gen Z want to be within the firm, or at least feel like their values are represented within the firm as well. And I think social justice over the last year has been a big statement there. And so I think if firms did not commit to that, that definitely hurt their chances of retaining their attorneys.
Yeah, I think you're right. A more socially conscious law firm is something that I'm hearing as well. And a firm that really does understand my values is also something I'm hearing, as well as the firms that are more flexible. You guys have been saying this, and it sounds like you all are doing this, but I am hearing firms that say 2 weeks after vaccination, you need to be back in the office, or September, the day after Labor Day, everyone's back in the office. And I think that is a very short-sighted way, personally, to think about things. And I think it can make or break. It could be the difference. I'm also hearing that some firms are looking at talent, in South Carolina, whereby they, have a New York office and the base is New York, and now they're opening themselves up to other pools of talent. And they were doing that during the pandemic, which is something I hope doesn't fall by the wayside when we go back to quote unquote normal. Mary, question for you. How do you think law firms can use this? Sorry, Mary Kay, sorry. How can law firms use this current environment to their advantage in any way? You can answer the question in any way you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the conversation about flexibility and retention generally, but flexibility going forward is a really important one. In that, I think we know there are benefits to being in the office. There are things that happen in the office that don't happen at home. There's, mentoring, being part of a team, bonding with each other, and yet there are real benefits too, and also in terms of space and just managing space, to having people spend some time away from the office. So I think the challenge for firms is to figure out how to balance those two things so that you and I think I've always felt like this could be done, and we've been living in an environment, frankly, where a lot of partners didn't come to the office before COVID. So how do you institutionalize it? So you make sure that you get the benefits of people being in the office while still having people have flexibility. I think that's the holy grail. I also think that we've got to keep an eye on women and diverse lawyers and you know, women and young fathers too, who've got to balance sort of crazy situations at home and granted, hopefully kids will be back in school, but we're still seeing a lot of you know, pressures on younger people to be able to balance the work and the home life. So I think that's an important thing. The last thing I wanted to say was, I just think it's really important that everybody in the recruiting process really understand what your story is. You know, why you and not someone else, if you're a smaller firm, you often do have some of these advantages around things like getting to work really closely with partners versus being in a pool of a bunch of associates and being managed by a more senior associate, et cetera.
I agree with you. Why your firm? Why not someone else? What makes you different? Get your lawyers involved in the recruiting process. Get them out there. Get them talking about what makes your firm unique, what it's like to work at your firm, why someone should want to work at your firm.
I find that a lot of it is like, we love our firm and there's just an assumption that everybody else is going to love it too. But people need to have, you know, as we were talking, it's not just about money. They need to have real reasons why they think I can build a better career here than somewhere else.
Well, right. And Danny, I'm sorry, Nicole, you had said, you know, you've got 5 offers on the table, similar salary, similar perk package, and the person isn't necessarily taking the one with the most money. It's about, you know, and I'm not sure in today's day and age, when you're interviewing remotely, you're not, you know, while it's more efficient, I'm not sure you're getting the full depth and breadth of what it's like to really work at that firm. Or even if you were going in the office and meeting with 7 partners, I'm not sure you actually know what it's like to work at a firm until you actually get there. So, you know, you can read all you want in Chambers Associate, you can read all you want on Vault, on Above the Law, but to really understand what it's like, and you can ask people, but you need to really, you know, to find the right culture, to find the right firm. What makes Paul Weiss different from, you know, Cravath, which makes Cravath different from Skadden, is very different. So, you know, that's also something, you know, again, you need to carve out and find out and create a strategy that really helps you market yourself. And Nicole, I don't know, like, what do you tell your candidates when they're weighing those offers? And besides practice, when they're trying to find the right fit for themselves right now in a
That's a really good question. A lot of times what I do is I tend to work with kind of my same pet firm. So I have other people that I've previously placed there, and I keep up my relationship with my past candidates. It's just, you know, I like to always make sure they're doing okay. They share information with me. And so based on what my candidate that's in the market right now is looking for, a lot of times outside of the interview process, I will connect them with one of my past candidates that's there that I know can kind of have a great off the record conversation with them and really dive deeper into what it's like to work there. And then there's not a partner listening in and they feel like they're, you know, on the spot. It's just much more conversational. And I think those off the record conversations go a long way to helping the candidate know if this might be a good fit.
Yeah, and just, you know, I agree with that. It's such a game changer when you do that. Word of mouth is so powerful in terms of getting new clients and also finding the right place to work. Don't underestimate also the power of a Google search, social media, and Glassdoor. If your firm doesn't have a Glassdoor strategy, you should, thinking about how all these pieces work, because everybody's Googling you, whether you like it or not. That's my little, you know, caveat that I'll say there as well. I want to quickly touch on oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to build off something Nicole just said. I think internally, that is why it's imperative for us to really focus on lawyer referrals. I think that's exactly the same word of mouth situation and kind of off the record conversations. And those are invaluable connections that I suspect most firms don't, you know, capitalize on as much as we could.
Are
And
you guys offering?
I'm sorry, at Leopard, what we always say too is, let the data speak for itself. If they are really interested in going to a firm that is, promoting diversity, what are your diversity numbers? And the other firms that I'm looking at, what are their numbers? And data can also help drive decisions, and it's not entirely based on, yeah, this is a great place to work. It's more like, the numbers, the data of this firm shows that this firm is more aligned with your values than the other firms that you're looking at. So data can help construct a compelling narrative.
Your employees are the greatest brand ambassadors, and they can also, if there's a lawyer referral program in place internally, that's also a great motivator for people to refer folks. So I want to talk about, because we're running out of time, but I want to talk about just how you're holding on to diverse and women candidates, and then I want to just wrap it up. But some folks are asking about when was the last time each of your firms raised salaries? Does it go with what's going on in the market? So David, Danny, Diana, and Dan, the trends obviously are for the top 50 firm, top 100. It's different, I understand, but are you feeling pressure to raise your own salaries as a result of this news right now? And what are you guys thinking about doing?
So we actually raised salaries for our associates about a month and a half ago because we were watching the bonus wars and saying to ourselves, that's not the way to go about it, at least in our view, in terms of building long-term relationships with our associates and long-term commitment on their part to the firm. Again, I talk about that two-way street. This wasn't just, here's some battle pay, thanks very much, here's your next assignment, which I thought and was seeing fueling a little bit of a take the money and run kind of trend. And so we didn't want that to be what we were expressing to our people, but at the same time wanted them to know that we really did appreciate them and we're making a commitment to them long term in terms of what their salary base would be for the balance of this year and then going into next year when we would raise people as they advanced from a class standpoint.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else want to answer that?
I just want to say one thing about it related to the client reaction. I think it's really important to teach your lawyers to go to clients and explain to them why you have to pay what you have to pay. Because if you don't have good talent, you can't provide them with good service.
Yes, but there will always be the client that says, I don't want to pay $200,000 for a first-year associate, and you will get that. And so I agree with you, but again, it's the hidden, it's sort of like. If you don't
talk to clients about it at all, then they'll fill in the blank. It's really about communicating, right? And
mid-size and small firms have a little advantage here because they do, but yes, it's tough. I mean, you've got to compete for talent. You're right. And it does flow into, everything. So.
Yeah, and you have to invest in your talent too. So they're not going to want to pay that much for a first-year associate, but you need to train them. I think that that's going to contribute to your retention, and they're not profitable right off the bat, and most people are overpaying for those junior level associates, but it has to be part of your long-term investment.
Would anyone like to talk about what you're doing to retain your diverse and women your women lawyers, diverse and women lawyers?
I can mention that very briefly too. I don't mean to monopolize this, but being on the law firm side, we're listening to our diverse and women lawyers in terms of what we need to do. And finding out from them what's important, what they want to see, and intentionally creating a leadership pipeline for women and diverse lawyers so that they can ultimately be more represented in the top leadership of the firm. So it's everything from making people practice group co-chairs to even the younger lawyers having some type of leadership role and responsibility as it relates to those initiatives. So again, the intentionality that we spoke about earlier in terms of retention applies here doubly so.
Yeah, I would echo that. Listening, responding, communicating, following best practices from around the industry. We are Mansfield certified for the last several years, and a lot of those best practices that the Diversity Lab, for instance, puts out for law firm members is incredibly valuable and helps us in that regard too.
One of the things that we did in addition to looking at, talking with our diverse and women lawyers about engagement within the firm leadership was also education. I think along with inclusion training that occurred during the pandemic and continues this year and incorporating into our leadership training for our attorneys, what we're trying to do is make sure that people are aware around, like, for example, this week, we are closing our doors as a firm on Friday in observance of Juneteenth. But a lot of the employees did not know exactly the history of Juneteenth. And so what we've been doing throughout the pandemic and this year is basically doing lunch and learns or evening movies where we provide like popcorn and other things for people, and we allow them to come by and pick it up or ship it to them and allow them to have this kind of watch party, if you will. And then we have follow-up meetings to discuss those issues. So there's, because we found that through our surveys and talking with people that our diverse attorneys cared a lot about us educating and our role in social justice in the community and how we were outwardly facing to the community, but also encouraging our internal folks to feel like we were providing assistance to them. So that's been a major movement for us in the last 6 months and continues to be something that we're learning as we go.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay. So I'd love to ask each of you to give a parting thought, words of wisdom, anything you'd like to share with the audience from your perspective on this hiring market or retention, recruiting, et cetera. Takeaway. So Laura, can we start with you?
Well, we've never seen it as heated as it is right now. And I think it could get really tight, especially if firms do not begin to look outside their normal fishing pools for talent. They have to look in different locations. They have to look at a different group. Not everyone can be from a top 10 school. They're going to have to cast a wider net in order to fill, opportunities at their firm. And that could also mean more opportunities for more diverse attorneys, both gender and ethnic diverse attorneys, if they open up that net a bit wider. And that's what we hope will happen this year. But I think that's going to be one of the most positive things that come out of this hiring spree, is that it's not going to be a cookie cutter sort of recruiting process, that people are going to have to really look in a different direction to find the talent that they need.
Mm-hmm. Mary, Kay, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think this is a great problem to have, because what's going on here is we have enormous demand for legal services. So it's really, yes, it's put pressure on talent, but the reason is you see firms, many firms experience double-digit revenue and profitability growth last year. We're seeing that continuing into this year. We haven't seen that since 2007. So, back what we refer to the golden era. So this is actually great news for law firms.
David?
I would harken back to a question that you had posed, Stephanie, or a concept you've thrown out there about having a recruitment and retention strategy, and say it's really important for law firms to ask themselves 2 questions as they think about recruiting in this environment. And that is, what are you offering beyond the paycheck? And why should somebody stay at your law firm? You have to ask yourself and answer those questions. And hopefully those are the kinds of questions you're going to get from the candidates you want working at your firm.
Yeah, that's so smart. I agree with you, because it's not enough to have a fancy name on the door anymore. It's not going to keep your people. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say my big takeaway from this frenzied market is the recruiter, somebody like me, needs to really partner with their client on the recruiting side. I can tell my candidate all day about what's great about this firm and my past candidates that have been there and are still there and doing great. But my candidates are very forthcoming with me. They will share a lot with me that they may not share with my client. And so when I'm kind of that intermediary, and I can then partner with my client and say, hey, these are the key things my person is looking for. When you're setting up the interviews for them, who do you think would do the best job at selling that to this candidate? and we partner together to make that happen, I think that is how you get today in this market the best talent.
Yeah, so smart. I love that. Danny?
Sure. I had a few things. I totally agree with, understanding who you are as a firm. I think we've all really had to do some self-reflection and, firm reflection this year after everything that we've gone through. So, knowing what your full package is that you are able to offer, making sure that your attorneys can articulate that. And then we've talked about recruiting plans and we've talked about marketing plans, making sure that you have an integration plan for new attorneys can help in the recruiting process. This was years ago, not in response to the pandemic, but when we restructured our talent management department, we have a full-time employee that is an attorney integration manager. And that's somebody that drafts an integration plan. They do everything from, making sure that they know where the bathroom is to making sure that, they're going to be engaged with our existing clients and maybe hosting a CLE and things. So being able to tell people during the recruiting process, we got you when you come here. We're not just, trying to find a warm body to do work. We've got your back. We're invested in your success. We've got somebody here that's going to, guide you through it. And then obviously it helps on the retention side.
Yeah, and it helps on the productivity side and the client side to get started and know how to open files and do those things starting day one. So that is such an important part. We didn't go into, lateral success because that is a whole other webinar that is coming up.
Exactly, right.
Webinars, but know that, I agree with you. It's getting the talent is one step. Keeping the talent an entirely next, it's a whole other can of worms. So my dogs agree with that. Dan, do you have any thoughts on, parting thoughts, wisdom, words of wisdom?
Sure. Yeah. Two things, just along the lines of like kind of knowing yourself. I would think that, you've got a track record that you keep and share in a playbook when you're marketing yourselves to clients. You need to have that for talent as well and cater it to talent in the areas that they really want to see and can compare to other firms when they're interviewing. I think that's really important. So like a one pager or something like that, that's really going to show how you differentiate is important. And then the other thing, just putting my COO hat on, I'm really hoping, as Laura was showing, there was that increase in IP staff positions. Those are firms that have done a very good job in looking at legal operations. So they structure their staff in the exact type of task that they can do without having to have a JD. And in some cases, they do have a JD. But I think, this growth model, the way that it's looking, it's unsustainable just to pay people a lot of money. They're going to really have to look at their firm structure to be efficient. And that's where like legal process management and other things really need to be at the forefront in their minds, because otherwise they will be tackling serious burnout soon.
Yeah, and don't forget, we were at the forefront of being at a crossroads of this industry before the pandemic, particularly with ALSPs and, the rise of other competitors. I mean, so spending money like this for talent is part of it, but we also need to be prudent in the way we spend money. We're not sending people to a 1 hour meeting in LA, nor are we investing in maybe, new marble offices, but I agree with you. There is something going on there, Dan, and Laura showed those support positions. There are firms that are figuring out ways to manage different services in an effective way, which is why they're increasing. So we also saw in the data an increase, I think, in, like you saw, Laura, staff attorneys and some other positions. So I think some firms are expanding in certain areas and not expanding on the associate rank. So this is going to shake out a little bit more to see like where the productivity is coming and where the need is for certain positions. Diana, any parting thoughts from you?
Well, I'm not sure it's super unique to anything anyone else has said, but I'm going to bookend with just a little comment on what Laura was saying. I think we have to be cognizant that we can't do things the way we always did, and that recruiting is not a cookie cutter approach. I just would encourage creative thinking and creative approaches to meet our talent where it is.
Yeah, I mean, Laura will say, like, look outside the box for your talent, that all firms should be doing that. And I can't stress that enough, And I would say, beware of everyone as a competitor, right? It's not just, if you're a big firm, it's not just the big firms. If you're a mid-sized firm, it's not just the mid-sized firms. Your talent could be poached from a lot of different places. And so it's important to really make sure your people are happy, that they are satisfied, and that you really understand in terms of recruiting the kinds of people you want to come to your firm, and also your lawyers are trained on recruiting, that they're putting their best foot forward when it comes to explaining what it's like to work at your firm. So again, a marketing recruiting strategy, I think, is really important for firms right now in such a competitive market. So we have a couple of questions here. If anyone else has any questions, let me know. So there are a couple questions here. One is, so is there any, do you see any increased flexibility in firms hiring older attorneys? There have been some, older partners or older attorneys who've been nudged out because they didn't necessarily have books of business. There were a few questions in the chats about lawyers without books of business who are in a senior level and what value they provide now. Now, while we've looked a lot at associate statistics here and associate hiring, what are your thoughts on hiring service attorneys or attorneys who are very, very, have their legal skills down pat? They are they're very experienced, but they may not have a book of business. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's an appetite for hiring of those folks?
Well, I'm from the law firm side. Yeah, from the law firm side, I'm sorry to be equivocal, but it depends. It depends on the practice area. It can be very valuable, let's say, in a practice like private equity or investment management, where you really need kind of that considered experience, where somebody's seen a lot of what's gone down to help service what may be coming in that's new. It's so much of it's culturally based. From our side, we like to really develop our talent within. We have like an industry recognized very, very low attrition rate. We bring people up from some, there are plenty of partners here who were summer associates at the firm. And so we like to continue to develop that. And so we are careful and measured in terms of kind of creating a little bit of a logjam to advancement within practice groups. But look, at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon us to provide fantastic service to our clients. And if we can identify a senior lawyer who brings a wealth of experience and can really provide that service, there's not a reason why we would not consider that.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could add anything to that, I think, a lot of times that type of person is either coming in-house to a law firm that was pretty senior in-house, or they're coming from government. And typically it's centered around a specific industry or an institutional client of the firm's, and they can be extremely valuable. I think the challenge when hiring that type of lateral, as always is the case, is productivity, timekeeping. If they haven't been doing that for a long time, it's hard. But again, you have to weigh the pros and cons of how important and strategic this hire is versus the rest of the bench strength of the team.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I think as with any decision. And then there's one other question in here that just says, when people are joining your firm now, what are they giving you as the reasons why they've chosen your particular firm?
Want me to take that one again, I guess?
Yes,
Sorry. So it varies, but something that Nicole was talking about before, and that is people who have a number of different competing offers. And this is on the lateral partner side. We just brought on somebody, former Southern District prosecutor, who had offers from a lot of different firms, big law, straight through some mid-size as well. Chose us, I think, because what we provide is the ability to build your practice in a lateral platform without being, and I'm going to overuse the word silo, or I'm going to use the overused word silo here. We don't identify, okay, you're a private equity lawyer, you are a white collar lawyer, you are an IP litigator. People who come here, and this is true on the associate side too, people who are ambitious, see the fact that we have the ability to develop practices across multiple different practice areas here because of the culture that we have and the support that we give one another. So people really seem to like that, appreciate that. That's really been a driver, both in terms of partner recruitment and associate recruitment.
Yeah, I could say from the consulting side, what I see is people coming to firms, because, especially lateral partners with some experience. They come to firms because that platform is going to work better for them to build their career, build their business.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big reason. And so that's another thing about knowing your story, knowing what you truly have to offer in terms of their career path. So you can people who work for very big prestigious firms, but might not see a whole lot of headroom because there's tons of other people there who are doing what they're doing. They can go somewhere else and build that practice, maybe even from scratch, if it fits with the strategy of the other firm. There's lots of reasons why that might happen.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's alignment of visions, what they have and their needs for themselves, and does that align with the firm's strategic plan and where the firm is growing and heading? And will they be treated like, more than just a number, not the revenues that are transferring with them or somebody that can take the overflap? Are we going to pull them into the fold? And that's why they decide to come, because they feel like we are.
Is anyone here worried about overhiring and then what to do with all the extra lawyers?
Wouldn't say worried about
not really right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't say overhiring. It's more about long-term fits, because when you hire that quickly, that's the challenge. Is this person going to work out long-term? As people retire or new people come in, how are they going to mentor lawyers? Do they have experience there? Do we need training there? And so there's all these thoughts that come in, but not at the moment.
I just think if you're hiring the right way and you're making good choices and making good hires, there's going to be room for everybody. If you're doing it too fast now and you just got to get somebody in there really quick, then I think, there'll be some extra people hanging around later on. But as long as your hiring processes are sound, then I don't see it being an issue later.
And it sounds like everyone here has worked out a good virtual hiring process that has been more efficient from the things I've heard you all talk about. Otherwise, do you all agree that virtual hiring has made you more efficient in what you do? Or do you think it's been a better way to find candidates versus the old way we did it with, scheduling in-person meetings and canceling and all that kind of thing? Do you think there's something to be said for this new way of arranging interviews over Zoom or whatever interface you're using? And do you think that is here to stay, irrespective of going back to the actual physical office? Has that changed? Or has that made this easier for all of you to be able to fill these positions quicker? And I would say, Nicole, this must have changed the entire landscape of the recruiting world, right? In terms of being able to just logistic wise get these interviews done and get these folks, placed, right?
Yes, by and large, up until very recently, the entire process was being done virtually, from the screener to the full round. Even if that meant the poor candidate was sitting on a Zoom for 3 hours, it was all virtual. We are just now starting to see some in-person things, and that's where both parties are interested in doing that. It's not the firm demanding it in any way. The candidate wants that as well. And even if they're doing the interview portion virtually still, the firm is making more of an effort to maybe do something outside the office, like let's go to lunch, let's do dinner. Like those things are starting to happen now, and I think that's positive.
Okay, good. All right, so I think this is a good place to sort of end the conversation for today. I want to thank every one of you for your insights and your thoughts, and wishing all of you good luck with all of your candidates and retention, and thank everyone who joined us today. The slides will be available, as will a recording of this presentation. So thank you everyone for being here, and I hope you all have a really good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Everyone, take care. Bye.
Have a good one.